Dream, 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 dream. Dream, dream, dream when I want you. In my arms when I want you. And all your charms whenever I want you. All I have to do is dream. Dream, dream, dream when I feel blue in the night and I need you to hold me tight whenever I want you. All I have to do is dream. I can make you mine, taste your lips of wine anytime, night or day. Only trouble is, gee whiz, I'm dreaming my life away. I need you so that I could die. I love you so, and that is why whenever I want you, all I have to do is dream. Dream, 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 dream.
It's November 8th, 1960, and wake up, Texas, because it's election day. You get to choose who you want to lead. For the Senate, you literally have a David versus Goliath type battle with Lyndon Johnson versus John Tower. John Tower, a Texas state representative representing the Republican Party, is trying to literally take down Goliath. And that Goliath is Lyndon Johnson in the Texas Democratic Party. You see, he was not just running against any U.S. senator. Lyndon Johnson was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1949 and worked his way up the ladder in the Democratic Party, eventually becoming their leader in 1953. Johnson is considered one of the most effective party leaders in history. One of many things he did as leader was send senators on NATO visits so they would not cast a dissenting vote. Despite being a Southerner, he supported the Civil Rights Acts of 1957 and 1960 and convinced other fellow Democrats to follow through. Johnson was always able to get fellow Democrats to rally around him. Johnson was also a heavy smoker and smoked up to 60 a day and suffered a non-fatal heart attack, but it didn't seem to stop him. Nothing did. However, Johnson has something bigger on his mind: the executive branch. Not only do you have a Senate election, Texas, you also get to elect a new president. With sitting President Dwight D. Eisenhower's term set to expire in January of '61, the Republican Party chose to go with his vice president, Richard Nixon, to succeed him. For the Democrats, they had a bunch of interesting candidates. One of them was Lyndon Johnson, but his campaign would end up fizzling out. What they came out with was a young hotshot senator from Massachusetts named John F. Kennedy. Kennedy was, however, not without critics, even within his party. He was only 43, so was he too young to be president? He had many health problems, and his Catholic faith scared many off. For his vice president, Kennedy chose to go with Johnson, likely because of his influence in the Senate and also helpfully bring in some Southern voters. So there you have it, John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson representing the Democratic presidential ticket in 1960. But let's back up a little bit. The Democratic Party was established by Andrew Jackson and his supporters in the 1830s. It's far different from the one today, but many of the fundamentals created by Jackson are still within the party, such as a strong government. The Republican Party was established in 1854, though credit for who established it is debated. It was created as a way to oppose the expansion of slavery out west. The first Republican president was Abraham Lincoln, and it led to the Civil War. I'm glossing over a ton here, and there are many things that led to the Civil War, such as, well, slavery. However, the Republicans' anti-slavery views deeply disturbed those in the South. Once the war ended, Republicans played a main role in passing laws that granted rights to former slaves. This made many in the South envy the Republican Party, mainly because many of these amendments gave former slaves rights. The Republican Party became the party that most African Americans supported. The only people who voted Republican in the Deep South were likely African American. Despite the hatred in the South, the Republicans would dominate the executive branch from 1877 to 1993. There were only 2 Democratic presidents, and they needed many things to go their way to get elected. Many could argue that Woodrow Wilson's 1912 presidential win was lucky. Why was his victory lucky, you might be asking? Let's get to that. Woodrow Wilson would be going up against incumbent Republican President William Howard Taft. However, Wilson was not Taft's biggest threat to re-election. Theodore Roosevelt. He served as America's 26th president from 1901 to 1909. He chose not to run for a third term, respecting the standard that George Washington set, despite being relatively young and still having strong support. His Secretary of War, William Howard Taft, would end up running and winning that election. However, Roosevelt disagreed with many of Taft's policies. He challenged him for the Republican nomination in 1912, which ended up going to Taft. Roosevelt and his many supporters would create a new political party, the Progressive Party. When Roosevelt got the nomination, he said he felt as strong as a bull moose. The party would then go on to be known as the Bull Moose Party. Probably the most memorable moment that happened to Roosevelt during the election is when he was shot, but he was protected by his steel eyeglass case and a 52-page folded speech. Roosevelt did not even go to the hospital. He still delivered the speech, despite getting shot. Just remember that the next time you get sick. Wilson would end up winning big and carried many states that traditionally voted Republican. It's likely Taft and Roosevelt split the vote of many Republican voters. After Wilson left office in 1921, the Republicans went back to dominating the executive branch, and their wins were not even close. The economy was good and everything was great. It all came crashing down in October of 1929, with the absolute crashing of the stock market leading to the Great Depression. Herbert Hoover, the Republican president serving, was heavily scrutinized by American citizens for his handling of the Depression. While far from his fault, Hoover's reputation was heavily damaged. In the 1932 election, he was defeated by rising star Franklin D. Roosevelt in what marked 20 years of Democrats controlling the executive branch. Roosevelt's policies were loved by American citizens, but not so much by DC politicians. Many African Americans who had traditionally voted Republican even supported Roosevelt. Many Democrats even lost support with him and endorsed Republican candidates who challenged Roosevelt in his quest to be elected 4 times. Harry Truman took over as president in 1945 following Roosevelt's death and served that position until 1953. For Texas, it had been a staunch Democratic state since it entered the Union in 1845. It had only elected 2 Republican governors and 2 Republican senators, the last of which served in 1877. Texas had only voted Republican in 3 presidential elections, the first of which was in 1929 when it went Republican for the first time ever, choosing Herbert Hoover over Democrat Al Smith. Smith, being a Catholic, likely hurt him. It then voted Republican in back-to-back presidential elections in 1952 and 1956, going with Dwight Eisenhower. Eisenhower, being a World War II leader and hero and also being born in Texas, may have helped him win the state twice. So yeah, John Tower is literally David, and Lyndon Johnson is Goliath. The 1960 presidential election was highly contested between Richard Nixon and John F. Kennedy. This election also featured the first presidential debate ever televised. Nixon had injured his knee while campaigning and still had not 100% recovered. Nixon refused to wear makeup during the broadcast, and his beard stubble showed up on the TV, and he began to sweat hard during the debate, while his competitor Kennedy looked calm and relaxed. Still, the election was still up in the air. John F. Kennedy would end up winning the election. It was really close, however, and it still remains one of the most iconic presidential elections of all time. Kennedy would end up carrying Texas, but it was very close. Kennedy performed very poorly in the Dallas Metroplex area, and it likely kept the race close. For the Senate election, Johnson ended up defeating Tower. This despite an awesome campaign slogan by Tower: "Double your pleasure, double your fun! Vote against Johnson 2 times, not once." It's important to note Tower had performed better than most Texas Republican candidates.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
However, Johnson could not serve as both a senator and vice president at the same time. Johnson stepped down from his seat before assuming the vice presidency in January of 1961. Texas Governor Price Daniels would appoint Bill Blakey as senator. A special election would be held in the spring of 1961 to decide who would serve as senator of Texas. Tower opted to give it another shot and got the Republican nomination again. He would go up against Bill Blakey. Blakey and Tower both held similar conservative views. This would not be the first time Blakey was running to keep a Senate seat. In 1958, he lost the Democratic Party nomination for Texas Senate to the more liberal Ralph Yarborough. Blakey was likely hurt by his support of John F. Kennedy's New Frontier policies that were unpopular in Texas. His nomination caused a divide between conservative and liberal Democrats. Blakey was also hurt by Tower's age. Tower was only 35 and he appealed a lot more to younger voters. Despite this, Tower was still a David, going up against a Goliath in the Texas Democrats. John Tower ended up narrowly defeating Bill Blakely to win the Texas special election. Tower was the first Republican to be elected in any former Confederate state. The other two Texas Republican senators were appointed by military leaders during Reconstruction. It was seen as a major blow to Kennedy, especially with the issue of civil rights. In the 1962 Texas gubernatorial election, Secretary of Navy John Connally was elected governor of Texas. He was a member of the conservative side of the Democratic Party. He had defeated previous Governor Price Daniels in the Democratic primary. Connally and Texas Senator Ralph Yarborough would lead to a divide in the Texas Democratic Party between Connally, a conservative Democrat, and Yarborough, a liberal Democrat. In 1963, Kennedy was already planning his 1964 re-election. The Texas Democratic Party planned a visit to the state in November of 1963 to smooth over relationships between the two sides of the party. It even included a stop in Dallas, where Kennedy had not performed well. It even included a motorcade through Daley Plaza. For the motorcade through Dallas, Kennedy rode with his wife Jacqueline and John Connally, as well as John Connally's wife Nellie. Likely because of his feud with Connally, Yarborough chose not to ride with Kennedy and chose to ride in the car behind him. Those would be the final words John F. Kennedy would ever say.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time.
John F. Kennedy would be assassinated on November 22, 1963 in Dallas, Texas. He was only 46 years old. While many details are debated, the investigation after his death claimed that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone and fired 3 shots out of the Texas Book Depository building. 2 of them hitting Kennedy, one of them even hit Connally. Oswald would be arrested later that day after killing Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit. 2 days later, he was killed by nightclub owner Jack Ruby. The nation would be heartbroken seeing the young president killed.
On the 20th day of January, in 1961, John F. Kennedy told his countrymen that our national work would not be finished in the first 1,000 days, nor in the life of this administration, nor even perhaps in our lifetime on this planet. But he said, "Let us begin."
Lyndon Johnson took over as president. One of the most instrumental moves of his presidency was the signing and passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that made it illegal to prohibit anyone based on race, gender, and any national basis. Because of Johnson being from the South and him serving in the Senate likely played a major role in the act being passed. However, not everyone was happy. One of those who was not happy was South Carolina Senator Strom Thurmond. And yes, I'm going to say his name like Strom Thurmond, because it's kind of fun to say it that way. Thurmond, who had a sick name, served as Senator of South Carolina until 2003. He was 100 years old when he retired. Thurmond, a former supporter of racial segregation, switched from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. Other Democrats from southern states would join him. One person who was opposed to the act was Senator Barry Goldwater from Arizona. However, Barry Goldwater was by no means a racist. He was a member of the NAACP and worked to prevent segregation in Arizona, and had voted in favor of other previous civil rights acts. So why was he against this one? He mainly thought it unconstitutionally expanded the powers of the executive branch. He would come to regret this decision. Barry Goldwater was the leader of the conservative Republicans, while New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller was the leader of the moderate Republicans. So why am I bringing up this Barry Goldwater guy? That's because he was challenging Johnson for the presidency in the 1964 presidential election. Despite being from separate parties, Goldwater and Kennedy were actually very close friends in Congress. Goldwater was very upset over Kennedy's death. Goldwater did not like Lyndon Johnson and believed he used dirty tactics to achieve this power. One supporter of Barry Goldwater was John Tower. Tower had also voted against the Civil Rights Act of 1964 for the same reason as Goldwater. Ralph Yarborough voted in favor of the act. Despite being from a southern state, Yarborough had voted in favor of every civil rights law. He was popular among the liberal Democrats, while not so popular among the conservative. The reason I bring this up was because Yarborough was up for re-election. However, the Texas Republicans had a rising star, George Herbert Walker Bush. He was the son of Connecticut Senator Prescott Bush. He and his family had moved to Texas in 1948. Bush worked in the oil industry before moving into politics. In 1963, Bush was elected leader of the Harris County Republican Party. In the 1964 election, he supported the more conservative Barry Goldwater over the moderate Nelson Rockefeller. Bush would win the Republican nomination for the 1964 Texas Senate election against Yarborough. Bush was also opposed to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, but like Goldwater, not for racial reasons, rather he believed it unconstitutionally expanded the powers of the federal government. Yarborough would end up defeating Bush. However, Bush had proven that he was a strong voice. In 1966, George H.W. Bush was elected to the U.S. House of Representatives. The 1964 presidential election between Lyndon Johnson and Barry Goldwater was mainly on Goldwater's far-right views, which unsettled many moderate Republicans. Strom Thurmond! And several other former Democrats would endorse Goldwater. Johnson portrayed Goldwater as an extremist, most infamously with this ad.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 6, 8, 9,
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
These are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
Yeah. Johnson also attacked Goldwater for having support from the Ku Klux Klan, despite Goldwater having no ties and denouncing their support. What also hurt Goldwater was his lack of support among moderate Republicans, like previously said, mostly Nelson Rockefeller. In the 1964 election, Johnson dominated re-election. Johnson had successfully convinced voters that Goldwater was a crazy extremist. Goldwater did become successful in winning 5 states in the Deep South, something that looked impossible for Republicans to do. Goldwater had laid a blueprint for years to come. He had given rise to modern conservatism in the Republican Party. One Democrat was an actor from California, who would be greatly influenced by Goldwater's views. You'll find out who he is, but I think you know who he is. John Connally served 6 years as governor and was praised for improving education and tourism in Texas. He stepped down in 1969 and was succeeded by Preston Smith. By this time, the Republicans began to make moves to appeal to Southern voters, and Barry Goldwater had laid the groundwork for conservatism. The rest of Johnson's term would be America's involvement in Vietnam. Johnson would provide support to South Vietnam to aid their fight against communist North Vietnam. Johnson feared the domino effect and sent more troops to prevent the spread of communism in East Asia. Johnson's Vietnam War policies became very unpopular among youth America, as they believed Johnson was sending young Americans to die in a war they had no business being a part of. Hey, LBJ. How many kids did you kill today? Because of this, Johnson chose not to run in the 1968 election and endorsed his vice president, Hubert Humphrey. In 1968, civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Texas Senator Ralph Yarborough criticized America's involvement in Vietnam and endorsed Democratic challenger Robert F. Kennedy, brother of John F. Kennedy. Robert F. Kennedy challenged Johnson's Vietnam views. However, on June 5, 1968, Kennedy was assassinated in L.A. Hubert Humphrey would end up getting the Democratic nomination. For the Republicans, Richard Nixon chose to give the presidency another shot. He campaigned on law and order. Da 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 da. He mainly campaigned on law and order because the Vietnam War and major other political assassinations had, well, kind of gotten everyone rallied up. Hey, 1968 was a wild year. I'm glossing over a lot of stuff. However, a new challenger would emerge in the 1968 presidential election. Johnson signing the Civil Rights Act had lost some support of many Democrats in the South. A third-party candidate would emerge in former Alabama Governor George Wallace. George Wallace was a staunch segregationist, infamously standing in front of the entrance of the University of Alabama, blocking the path of many black students. Wallace served as governor from 1963 to 1967, but due to term limits, he was halted from running for re-election. So instead he had his wife, Lurleen, run and succeed him as governor. She was basically a puppet for him. However, she only served 16 months as governor before dying of cancer at only 41. She was actually diagnosed in 1961, but George Wallace chose not to tell her. Wallace's campaign appealed to Southern Democrats and Goldwater supporters in the South. Wallace was against racial integration and heavy anti-establishment. Nixon tried to take advantage of the split. Richard Nixon would pull off a very close victory, just about inching out Humphrey and Wallace. Texas, however, was the only southern state to vote for Humphrey, as many others went with either Wallace or Nixon. Nixon would be tasked with the Vietnam War, and America was now moving into the 1970s. The main political issues of the 1960s were the Civil Rights Movement and the Vietnam War. It marked a change in political geography. You see, most Southerners were Democrats, while most Northerners were Republican. It had been that way since the two-party system started during the Civil War. There are some exceptions, but that's how it's been for almost 100 years. Until now! With several Democrats joining the Republican Party and endorsing Republican candidates, slowly yet surely there were a rise of conservatism in the South. In the 1960s, the Republicans had set their goals on taking the South from the Democrats. For Texas, it was not quite the Democratic stronghold. In 1966, John Tower became the first Republican but former Confederate state to win re-election, doing so easily. However, rising star George H.W. Bush was out there, and he wasn't just about to influence Texas politics, but American politics.
Dream, 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 dream. Dream, dream, dream when I want you. In my arms when I want you. And all your charms whenever I want you. All I have to do is dream. Dream, dream, dream when I feel blue. In the night and I need you to hold me tight whenever I want you. All I have to do is dream. I can make you mine, taste your lips of wine anytime, night or day. Only trouble is, gee whiz, I'm dreaming my life away. I need you so that I could die. I love you so, and that is why whenever I want you, all I have to do is dream. Dream, 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 dream. I can make you mine, taste your lips of wine.